we're going to talk about ORP. So today is July 11th, and we are racing last weekend of the month. So that's coming up quickly, and we have a lot to do. And we have a lot of customer cars that got to go out before we get to work on our car. So it just means late nights, weekends, things like that. But so basically, after doing some more digging on our car after PIR, we found another issue. The passenger side sway bar mount on the chassis actually got torn off of the chassis, and that was the clunk I was hearing. The damage to the subframe, I think it's just lucky that the sway bar failed, because then it alerted me that something was wrong, and we saw the subframe failure. Whereas it hadn't 100% failed yet, so it still had reasonable geometry, but it was going to fail. And so I think it's good that we retired the car, but the damage to the subframe is more than what we want to try and repair. So we just got a new subframe in today. Building up some reinforcement plates for the motor mounts and for the lower control arm pickup point, and we'll get those on, and then we'll get that reinstalled in the car. And then we need to repair the sway bar mount. So our chassis is a 92. I don't actually know where the switch is, but at some point they switch over to attaching to the subframe, and ours doesn't have that. So nobody makes, that I'm aware of, any reinforcement plates or anything like that for it. So we're gonna fix the damage to the attachment point on the frame rail right now, just so we can go to ORP and run the same sway bar. We have a new sway bar system we're designing for it that it's probably 6-8 weeks out before we can implement it, so it might be after the Ridge. So we'll run that system at Cascade Enduro and then at Thunder Hill for the season finale. And that'll give us plenty of time to test it as well, because we're going to a torsion bar system, so we can, the blade arms on there, we can actually go to in-cockpit adjustable. We're not going to, but if we wanted to, we could. So if we see a reason for it, that option's there. But we'll still have adjustability on the blades like a standard sway bar, but we can also change out the torsion bar in there and go to stiffer or softer torsion bars to change the entire range of the sway bar as well. But it all has the same form factor. So, you know, we can just carry an extra torsion bar in the trailer for us for track or like rain when we want to go really soft. Put that torsion bar in. It's, you know, 15-minute install, pretty easy. And eventually we'll go to a similar setup on the rear. And ultimately it'd be super nice to have in-cockpit adjustability for the front and rear sway bars, but the car handles so well, other than rain settings. I mean, you know, traditionally you'll see sway bar changes based on fuel load changes and conditions on the track changing, but the big thing is the fuel level in the car is changing, so the weight bias of the car is changing. Our car just handles so nicely that it doesn't, full tank to empty tank, I really can't tell the difference on the car. The lap times are very similar. It's not like it starts pushing or, you know, anything like that. So I don't know that we need the complexity of an in-cockpit adjustable system, but it would be nice. It'd be fun to be able to play with that at tracks, especially during the practice days, and just on the fly change bar settings and see how it feels on that track. The setup we have, we basically run everywhere. We don't change shock settings and we don't change sway bar settings. So, and it works everywhere and it feels good everywhere, but perhaps a bar change might feel better. And so the nice thing about that is it's so easy to do. You can just go click, click and test it out and see what you think. So that's that. But we'll get the factory setup repaired, continue running our Turner front bar for ORP, and then we'll go from there. So the other thing is the motor. Motor's going back together. John's working on that right now. We've got to pull the cylinder head off, pull the pistons out, put the new rods in, new rod bearings, and then basically put everything back together. We've got ARP head studs, which we do on all these motors. If the head comes off, it gets ARP head studs. I don't think that's a must upgrade for this motor, but might as well have a reusable fastener in there with a little bit more clamping pressure. We don't have a lot of head gasket problems with the S54 motors, but it's just a little extra safety margin when we're pushing them as hard as we do. And at Portland, we were seeing pretty high coolant temperatures, so With OEM bolt, you know, it's possible we could have lost a head gasket, whereas with the ARPs that we do have in the current motor, it held the gasket in place and we didn't have any issues. And we monitor cooling system pressure, so if we have a leak from combustion chamber to cooling side, we'll pick it up immediately. We'll see it on the pressure, and that'll throw a warning for the driver so they know what's going on. And then, you know, we see in the data log reviews afterwards. But typically we see low 20 PSI range in the cooling system. Head studs, we're keeping OEM main bolts because we're not machining the main line on this motor. And we're putting in SuperTech rods, so they use an OEM pin. So it's just a drop-in replacement. And obviously we'll check the bearing clearances and everything, but we're using the VAC coated bearings for this motor. And then we have SuperTech rods, upgraded head studs, and we'll do new main bearings and OEM pistons with the original rings. The compression was really good on this motor, so we'll inspect the rings, make sure we don't have like an issue maybe with an oil control ring or something like this. But we've dynoed this motor before we took it apart, and it made really good power, a little over 300 at the wheels, and 300 at the wheels on pump gas actually. So had a little bit better compression than our motor, so it's going to be a good backup motor once we get all these issues addressed on it. We've got, you know, repaired the oil pump pickup issue on it, all new chains and guides and all that stuff. So it'll basically be a brand new motor, except for the pistons and rings, and they're in good shape. So that saves us from having to machine the block right now. So we can get the motor together this week, get it back in the car, and do a little bit of testing, maybe even get out to the track midweek before the ORP race, and just get some data on the car and make sure everything looks good. We also have a new radiator coming. We had a custom radiator built for the car. It's 20% larger ambient area on the core, a little bit larger end tanks, and no oil cooler or anything like that in there. And we're moving our oil cooler to a different location, so it's not in series with the radiator. And by that I mean the air that comes through the oil cooler doesn't then go through the radiator. This is an advantage because it frees up that area of the core, which was significant. So we're adding ambient size to it in addition to unblocking a decent part of the core by moving the oil cooler. So we'll get better airflow through the oil cooler and the radiator and expose more ambient area. So hopefully that takes care of, we don't have cooling problems on anything below 90-degree days, but at Portland it was 101, and it was just, you know, we were seeing over 220 on coolant temps in the car. And it really, we were given like half throttle would be the most we would use on that car. So we're significantly reducing power output, trying to control temperatures. And we still ran good lap times, led a good part of the race. I mean, other than the first 30 minutes of the race, we were pedaling the car all day. So the car is still capable in that sense. So that's not an excuse why we didn't win or anything. It's just that as a driver, you don't want to be hamstrung by cooling problems. And we want the car to be reliable in all conditions. So we're making these changes to the cooling system, oil cooler, radiator, and it'll give us a little bit more clearance in the motor to get in there and work on some stuff. And we're cleaning up a few details in the core support on the front end. And so there'll be some nice upgrades for the car that we've wanted to do for a while. We've just been putting them off because we were waiting to decide whether we wanted to do a custom radiator or maybe another off-the-shelf solution. We had a CSF in there, and it was their aluminum OEM replacement radiator, and it was fine in most conditions. It's just not quite big enough, and there's some compromises in the in-tank designs that are required for a stock car with all the OEM shrouding and just everything that's in the stock engine compartment. With our car, most of that stuff's changed, and so we don't need to make those compromises. So we were able to go in and design a no-compromise radiator that really fits our needs. So that's cooling system. Chassis-wise, other than the subframe and the sway bar, we're not making any changes. Everything's going to stay the same there. we were hoping to get the new Bosch Motorsport pumps in. We have a dual setup for redundancy. We're just not going to have time before ORP. We have a fresh in-tank in there that's working great right now, so I'm not too concerned about it. That pump, that in-tank Aeromotive 340 ran the car for almost a year with no issues. And then we also run its OEM fuel pressure, which is quite high on the S54. It's almost 70 PSI. And so that works the pumps a lot harder. So I think another upgrade we're going to do in the near future is go to larger fuel injectors, drop the base pressure down to 43.5, which is pretty standard on most other motors. And then all the pumps are going to live an easier life. We just can't do that with the current injector size and meet our power goals. So it's a good upgrade to do in the future, but it's not something we need to do right now. But just laying out some of the plans. I think that's it. You know, other than that, the car is going to go on the dyno once the new motor's in. We'll double check the tune on that. It's all the same hardware, so nothing, you know, should need to change on that, but we'll verify everything. It does have the Denon throttle bodies, but you know, they're not going to affect the tune, and they're not going to make any power. They just look cool if you look inside the motor. And so we'll verify the tune of the dyno, we'll get an alignment rack, check the corner balance, make sure the alignment looks good. Well, we're gonna have to realign it because it's a subframe anyway. Now we're gonna put some additional bracing under the car as well when we do that subframe. So it'll tie the rear crossbar that's under the transmission with an X-brace to the subframe, which is not an uncommon upgrade. I think some of the Euro cars come with that. We're just doing our own custom version of it that'll actually mount the flat belly of the car as well. And then when we do our sway bar upgrade, that has an additional brace in the front down low at the belly pan level that will tie in a second X brace in the front. So those will all be good upgrades, but yeah, we'll check the alignment and wash the car, and then we'll go racing. Take one.